The boy who walked barefoot courtroom was cold, not just from the air conditioning, but from the stairs. Sundar Pichai stood alone, his hands folded quietly in front of him, eyes fixed on the polished floor beneath. The judge, a man with years of trials behind him and pride sitting high on his shoulders, leaned forward with a smirk on his face. It wasn't unusual for people to walk into his courtroom with strange ideas, but this soft-spoken man from India who claimed he could defend himself without a lawyer was something he hadn't seen in years. "Mr. Pichai," the judge began, his voice echoing across the hushed chamber. "I assume you're joking. You understand the consequences of representing yourself, yes?" Sundar looked up. His eyes, though calm, carried something heavy like pages of a story that had never been read aloud. He nodded. Double quotes. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand." A few people in the courtroom chuckled under their breath. Some even whispered to one another. The clerk shook her head as if watching the beginning of a slow collapse. But Sundar did not flinch. His voice was steady, his posture humble. He knew this was not a game, and he had not come to play dot. What no one in that room knew was that Sundar's story did not begin here, in this courtroom draped with oaken shadow. His story began decades earlier, beneath a tin roof, on the cracked streets of Chennai, where the sun melted the pavement and dreams often burned away before they could rise. He had walked to school barefoot for years, not because he was proud or strong, but because his family simply could not afford shoes. Every step on the hot ground was a quiet act of survival. His father, a kind man with tired eyes, worked as an electrical engineer, and though the pay was modest, he did everything to keep the lights on and food on the table. His mother stayed home, cooking, teaching, loving. Books became Sundar's escape. Not fancy novels, but textbooks old, tattered ones passed down from neighbors or schoolmates. He would sit under the one street lamp near his home, reading late into the night, mosquitoes buzzing, his legs covered in dust. He didn't dream of being rich. He didn't dream of being known. He only wanted to understand how things worked. Why things worked. The questions never stopped. When he first saw a computer, it was not in his home. It was not even in his school. He was 15, and a friend had brought him into an office building where someone had allowed them to take a brief look. The machine was beige and boxy, the screen blinking with green light. Most people saw a device. Sundar saw a universe, but none of that mattered to the judge now. To him, Sundar was just another overconfident man trying to handle something beyond his depth. A legal case involving one of the biggest corporate misunderstandings of the decade. The details were complicated, misinterpreted contracts, false media coverage, and accusations of fraud, but Sundar knew the truth. He had built his life on clarity and logic, not deception. The truth, as always, was quiet, but it was there as the prosecution began their opening statements, painting Sundar as a manipulative figure who had hidden key documents and exploited loopholes. Sundar listened without expression. Not once did he interrupt. Not once did he look away. But inside, something stirred. He remembered being denied a seat in a meeting room during his early days in Silicon Valley. He had walked in with a brilliant idea and was asked if he was lost. He remembered smiling politely and sitting in the back, scribbling his notes on the corner of a napkin. Humility wasn't a strategy. It was all he had. When the courtroom adjourned for lunch, the judge approached Sundar privately. Not out of kindness, but curiosity. "You really think you can win this?" he asked, half amused. Sundar looked at him, not defiant, not proud. "Just clear. I don't want to win, Your Honor. I just want the truth to be heard." The judge studied him for a moment. There was no sarcasm, no arrogance, just conviction. He turned and walked away, shaking his head. But deep down, something about Sundar's quiet determination unsettled him. Back at the bench, Sundar opened his old black bag. It wasn't leather. It wasn't new. It had scratches, creases, and a torn seam at the edge. From it, he pulled out folders. Organized, labeled, annotated in neat handwriting. He didn't have a legal team, but he had truth, and he had done his homework. The first witness stepped up. A former colleague from years ago, someone Sundar had once helped, trained, even recommended for a promotion. Now, that same man stood ready to testify against him. As the witness raised his hand to swear in. Sundar looked at him, not with anger, but with quiet sadness. People change. Memories bend. But he didn't hate the man. He pitied the pressure. He must have been under to lie. When Sundar stood to cross-examine, the courtroom shifted. This was the moment they expected him to fail, to stutter, to crack under the weight of legal language and formal procedure. Instead, Sundar spoke with calm precision. "You said I withheld documents? May I show you this?" He handed over a printed email, one that had been forwarded years ago, one that the witness himself had sent. Acknowledging Sundar's transparency, the courtroom went still. The witness froze. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Where did you get this?" the witness asked, almost breathless. "From my sent folder," Sundar replied. "I keep everything. Sometimes the truth hides in old files." The judge blinked. The prosecution scrambled. The first pillar of their argument had cracked, but Sundar didn't smile, didn't gloat. He returned to his seat, placed the paper back in his folder, and looked down again. It was never about proving people wrong. It was always about proving the truth right outside. The sky darkened. Thunder rumbled somewhere far away. The trial had just begun. And already, the quiet man who had walked barefoot to school had taken his first step into a storm no one saw coming. Asterisk. The threat beneath the door's note was thin, folded 3 times, and slid just beneath the edge of Sundar's hotel door, while the world outside drowned in thunder. The paper was slightly damp, as if it had been gripped too tightly by trembling hands or dragged through mist. Sundar stared at it for a long time before unfolding it. His room was silent, too silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. "You won't leave the courtroom alive." There was no signature. No ink smudge. No mark to trace. Just those 7 words, written in the kind of handwriting that made it feel like the person had etched them in haste or hate or both. Sundar looked. Around his room, the curtains were drawn. The door still locked, but he knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about winning or losing now. Someone was scared enough of the truth to want it buried along with him, but Sundar had learned long ago not to panic. He sat down on the edge of the bed, holding the paper in both hands. The memory of his father's voice came back to him, soft and steady. "When people fear you without cause, son, it means your quiet is louder than their shouting." He remembered being 10 years old, standing outside the school gates, his science project in a torn paper folder. Some boys had mocked him, called him names, tried to tear it apart. He hadn't cried. He hadn't shouted. He'd simply picked it up, taped it back together, and handed it to the teacher. That project won him a state prize. But it also taught him something greater: truth, like water, may get dirty, stepped on, or pushed aside. But it always finds its way forward. He folded the note carefully and slid it into a notebook in his bag. Not out of fear, but because everything mattered now. Even the threats. The next morning, the hotel lobby was humming with quiet tension. Sundar stepped in, wearing the same simple clothes as before. No suit, no briefcase, just his worn-out bag. And that same calm expression. Reporters had started to gather outside the courthouse. People had begun to whisper. Who was this man? Why did he believe he could face a legal machine alone? He walked past the news cameras without a word. The courthouse towered ahead of him, gray and sharp against the cloudy sky. Inside, the judge sat already, reviewing papers, his expression unreadable. As Sundar took his place, the clerk announced, "The court is now in session." Today's witness was a corporate consultant. He had been brought in by the prosecution to provide expert analysis to show that Sundar had knowingly created confusion in contractual language to benefit his own agenda. The man spoke with authority, using charts and legal jargon, throwing words like manipulative structuring, intentional ambiguity, and profit laundering like knives. Sundar listened patiently. He made no notes, but he watched every flicker in the witness's expression. When it was his turn to cross-examine, the judge tilted his head, clearly curious. Yesterday's calm attack had caught everyone off guard. What would Sundar do today? He approached the witness stand and placed a small, printed document on the bench. Do you recognize this report? Sundar asked. The consultant nodded, a bit too quickly. Yes, that's my early audit from 2 years ago. And in it, Sundar continued, you mentioned that the contract language, while complex, was within industry norms and contained no evidence of deliberate concealment. Correct? The consultant's smile twitched. Well, yes, at the time. So, Sundar interrupted gently. Your professional opinion changed only after you were hired by the prosecution's legal team? A murmur rippled through the room. The judge raised an eyebrow. Additional data came to light, the consultant said, clearing his throat. Or, Sundar said, his voice never rising, perhaps your opinion was changed because you were paid to change it. Silence. The consultant looked away. Sundar stepped back, not needing to say more. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Pichai, do you have evidence of this? Sundar opened his folder and handed the judge a printed email from the prosecution's office one. That had mistakenly CC'd a paralegal's internal note, stating, make sure Dr. Lathrop's opinion fits our narrative. The judge's lips pressed into a tight line, and still, Sundar didn't smile. Humility was not an act. It was his armor. During the break, Sundar sat alone in the hallway, sipping water from a paper cup. He had not eaten. His stomach turned not from hunger, but from the memory of the note. Someone out there didn't want him to finish what he had started. He noticed a young man watching him from across the corridor. Early 20s, wearing a courier's badge, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Their eyes met. The man quickly turned and walked away. Sundar stood. He followed, quietly, through the hallway and out into the back lot. Wait, Sundar called out. The man froze. Did you slip this under my door? The man didn't answer. Instead, he looked terrified. I didn't mean to. I was just told to deliver it. By who? The courier hesitated. They said if I didn't do it, they'd ruin my sister's job application. I swear, I don't even know what it means. Sundar took a step closer, then placed a hand gently on the man's shoulder. It's okay. You've done nothing wrong. The man looked up, surprised by the kindness. You're not going to report me? Truth doesn't come from fear, Sundar said softly. Go home. Tell your sister to apply anyway. If she's good, she'll make it on her own. The man walked away, and Sundar turned back toward the courthouse, feeling the weight of something darker growing behind the curtain of law. Inside. The judge called for the next session. The prosecution seemed rattled now, less confident, more aggressive. They threw out terms like obstruction, violation, misconduct, but each time Sundar responded not with deflection, but with documentation. His arguments were clean, his evidence untouched, but the pressure was rising. Just before the session ended, the judge made an announcement. Tomorrow, a surprise witness will be presented. Sundar narrowed his eyes. He had no idea who it would be, but something in his chest told him it wouldn't be just another testimony. It would be personal. It might be devastating. Asterisk. The missing Pageli room was still. Too still. The air carried the scent of tampered space, like something sacred had been touched by uninvited hands. Sundar Pichai stood at the threshold of his hotel room, his heart beating in a rhythm that wasn't panic, but something more controlled, more primal, awareness. Not a single item was missing. Not his laptop, not his notes, not even the envelope of cash he kept hidden beneath a stack of socks. But something else had been taken. His journal, or rather, one page from it. The book lay open on the bed, spine cracked wide like a secret forced into confession. Sundar walked slowly toward it, eyes scanning the room for signed footprints, loose fibers, anything. He had learned to be observant not in boardrooms or courtrooms, but back in Chennai, where one shared room meant shared secrets. You noticed the smallest things when you grew up with little. He sat down and ran his fingers over the edge of the torn page? The journal had been with him for more than 20 years. Every page held fragments of who he was, ideas scribbled in the dark, moments of joy, tears that never touched his cheeks but had found their way into ink, the missing page. Remembered which one it was. A letter, written to himself during his lowest point in college. He had failed an important exam, not because he wasn't prepared, but because the electricity had gone out the night before and he hadn't been able to study. He'd written that letter to remind himself why he couldn't quit. Your name doesn't need to shine today, it had said. It just needs to survive until tomorrow. It wasn't valuable to anyone else. Unless someone wanted to remind him of what he once feared or use it against him. He folded the journal gently, like tucking away a child's drawing, and placed it back into his bag. He didn't call the police. He didn't ask the hotel for footage. He knew better now. Whoever had broken in wasn't interested in theft. They were interested in breaking him quietly from the inside. He stood at the window and watched the streetlights flicker. The storm had passed, but the sky remained heavy. Clouds hung low, like warning signs written in silence. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with something different. Energy, expectation, rumors had begun to spread that Sundar's quiet dismantling of the prosecution's arguments had embarrassed more than just the lawyers. That somewhere in the shadows of this case was a truth too large, too threatening to be allowed into the light. The courtroom filled quickly. The judge entered without expression. We will now proceed with the surprise witness. The doors opened. Sundar turned. And froze. Walking down the aisle, escorted by a bailiff, was a woman. Tall, graceful, with eyes that held both pain and defiance. It was Mira. They hadn't spoken in 15 years. Not since that cold January morning in New York, when Sundar had left her standing outside the immigration office. Her dreams folded into an envelope of rejected papers. They had been in love once, before ambition became distance, before misunderstanding became silence. Her appearance here wasn't just a twist in the case. It was a knife, and everyone knew where it would land. The judge looked at Sundar. Do you know this witness, Mr. Pichai? He didn't hesitate. Yes, Your Honor. Will you still proceed with representing yourself? Yes. Mira took the stand, her voice steady. She was introduced as a former associate in Sundar's early startup days. They had worked on a project together, one that, according to the prosecution, had ended in legal conflict and unreported earnings. But it wasn't the project they were really interested in. It was the relationship. The suggestion was clear. Sundar had personal motives, had hidden things, not out of greed, but guilt. Emotional concealment presented as professional fraud. Myra's testimony was powerful. Not bitter. Not cruel, but loaded with quiet indictments. He didn't lie, she said at one point. He just disappeared. The courtroom was captivated. Even the judge leaned forward, curious. When Sundar rose to cross-examine, the room held its breath. This was no longer about documents or contracts. This was about hearts that had broken. In the spaces between silence, Mira, Sundar began, his voice lower than usual. Do you remember the last thing I said to you? She looked at him. Her eyes didn't shine, but they held something deeper than tears. He said, I'll fix this. He nodded slowly. And did I? She didn't answer. I didn't fix it the way you needed, he continued. But I didn't walk away because I didn't care. I walked away because I thought I was saving you from a broken version of me. The judge interrupted gently. Mr. Pichai, please keep the questions relevant. This is relevant, Your Honor. He turned back to Myra. Do you believe I would risk my integrity, everything I've built, for the sake of hiding money from a company I helped create? Myra looked at him long and hard. No, she said finally. I believe you were always running from your own guilt, not from the law. Sundar nodded once. A tiny bow of acknowledgement. And just like that, he stepped back. No more questions. He returned to his seat. Outside. It began to rain. Soft at first. Then heavier. Inside. No one spoke for a long moment. The judge called for recess. Sundar stood in the hallway again, this time not alone. Myra approached him, her coat draped over her arm. "You didn't know I'd be here?" she asked. He shook his head. "I didn't even know where you were anymore. They said if I didn't testify, they'd freeze my consulting license." She said quietly, "I tried to tell the truth, but—" "You did," Sundar said, "and thank you for not destroying me." She looked at him, eyes searching. "You destroyed yourself long before any of this." Then she walked away, leaving him in the hallway, with nothing but the sound of dripping coats and the echo of their shared past. Later that night, back in his hotel room, Sundar opened his laptop. The screen blinked with a strange file. An email. No sender, no subject. Just an attachment. He opened it. A video played. Grainy. Security footage. And in it, clear as daylight, was the prosecution's lead attorney, handing an envelope to the consultant who testified in part 2. The same man who had changed his report. Bribery got caught on camera. But the file came with a message. "If this ever sees the light of day, the next time you come home, it won't be your journal that's missing. It'll be your story. Asterisk the price." Of Truth video kept playing on loop. No sound, no color. Just black and white footage from a grainy hallway camera. Frame by frame. It revealed the moment the prosecution's lead attorney handed an envelope to Dr. Lathrop, the expert witness, who had claimed Sundar had intentionally manipulated his contracts. Sundar watched it 5 times, 10, 20, not because he didn't believe what he was seeing, but because part of him couldn't believe someone had sent this to him anonymously. It was dangerous, illegal, and more than anything, it was powerful. Proof. Not speculation. Not theory. Hard evidence that the trial was being manipulated. Asterisk. He sat in his hotel room, the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The video glowed faintly from the screen, casting light on Sundar's tired face. And then his eyes drifted to the text that came with it. "If this ever sees the light of day, the next time you come home, it won't be your journal that's missing. It'll be your story." It wasn't a bluff. He knew that now. This wasn't just about corporate pride anymore, or courtroom power. It was bigger. Someone, somewhere, needed this case to disappear in their favor. And they were willing to go to any length to keep control. Sundar had always believed in the power of truth. But he also believed in the value of people. If he used this video, if he submitted it into evidence, he knew what would happen. The prosecution's case would collapse. The consultant's testimony would be destroyed. The attorney could be disbarred. But more than that, Myra could be dragged down with them. She had been called to testify under the guidance of the same legal team, and in a system where guilt by association spreads like wildfire, she could lose her license, her career, and everything she had rebuilt after they'd parted ways. Sundar leaned back in the chair, hands folded behind his head. For years, he had climbed his way out of poverty not by stepping over people, but by choosing moments when silence was more powerful than noise. When to hold back, when to wait. But this was not one of those moments. He shut his laptop gently, stood up, and walked to the window. The rain outside had stopped, but the streets still shimmered with puddles reflecting the city lights. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. It struck him how simple sounds always carried the weight of freedom. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in over a decade. Myra answered on the 3rd ring. "You're not supposed to call me," she said, her voice tight. "I know. What do you want?" "To ask you a question." "Then ask." "If telling the truth meant you'd lose everything, would you still do it?" There was silence on the line. The kind of silence that fills a room before a door closes. "Depends. What everything means." He exhaled slowly. "You once told me that your dream wasn't just to build something, but to do it cleanly. No lies, no shortcuts." "That was before the world taught me how dirty dreams really are," she said. "They're only dirty," he replied, "if we let them stay in the mud." She didn't respond, but she didn't hang up. Either. The next morning, Sundar walked into the courtroom with no expression on his face, but something different in his stride. Not faster, not bolder, just ... Heavier. He knew what he was about to do. And he was prepared to pay for it. The judge looked up as he entered. The prosecution team sat stiffly at their table, not yet knowing what was coming. Sundar placed a small USB drive on the table beside the bailiff. Your Honor, he said, I have something that needs to be entered into evidence. The judge raised an eyebrow. What is it? A video. It relates to the integrity of this trial. Within minutes, the room was darkened and the projector flickered to life. The footage rolled. No one spoke. When the attorney on the screen appeared, handing the envelope to Dr. Lathrop, a gasp escaped from someone in the gallery. The attorney in question, Mr. Stanwyck, stood slowly, face pale. This is a violation of privacy. He began, voice rising. This is illegally obtained footage. Is it real? The judge interrupted. Stanwyck opened his mouth, then closed it. This court does not permit fabricated evidence. Is it real? Yes, he whispered. The judge turned toward the bailiff. We will recess for a full investigation. Mr. Stanwyck, you are to remain in the building under judicial order. Chaos erupted. The courtroom buzzed like a hive that had just been cracked open. Reporters ran to their phones. The prosecution's bench sat frozen, their strategy crumbling in front of their eyes. But Sundar didn't celebrate. He returned to his seat quietly. Alone. After court adjourned for the day. Mira met him outside, standing near the old fountain on the courthouse lawn. Her coat flapped in the wind. Her eyes searched his face. You used it, she said. I had to. They'll come for me next. You know that? He nodded. I know. She looked away. You always choose truth, don't you? I try. Then she turned back to him. They told me to testify, Sundar. They said it was harmless, just background. They never told me they were using me. I know. But now, you'll survive, he said. You're stronger than you remember. Eyes softened. You always had too much faith in me. That's because I saw you before the world told you to doubt yourself. They stood there for a moment longer, in the silence of unspoken years. Then she walked away, not with anger, but with something that almost resembled peace. Sundar looked down at his hands. They weren't shaking. They never did. But inside, something was changing. Not breaking. Not bending. Just changing. Truth had come at a price. And the bill wasn't finished yet. Back in his hotel room, he opened his journal again. He turned to the blank page where the torn letter used to be. Then he picked up a pen and began to rewrite it from memory. Dear self, your name doesn't need to shine today. It just needs to survive until tomorrow. But if tomorrow asks you to stand, you stand. Even if your knees tremble, even if your voice cracks, you stand. He closed the book. And waited. The man who stood underneath the envelope was thin, white, and clinical, like all things designed to deliver something cold. Sundar held it in both hands, standing alone in the lobby of his hotel. The receptionist had called him down with a strained look, her voice barely above a whisper. Now she would meet his eyes. His name was printed neatly on the front. Mr. Sundar P. IATA. No return. Address. No. Sender. Just the weight of something heavy and something so light. He opened it slowly. Single sheet of paper inside. Court issued. The words were typed. The ink still slightly smudged near the corners. To Sundar Pichai. You are hereby notified that you are under formal review for possible evidence tampering in connection with material introduced during session on day 6 of the current legal proceedings. Failure to comply with further inquiry will result in immediate contempt charges and potential detainment. He read it twice. Then a third time. The words didn't change, but the world around him did. He looked up at the ceiling lights in the lobby. Blinking hard. The buzz of the fluorescent tubes above now felt louder, like the sound of a hive waking up. A couple passed behind him, laughing. The front desk bell rang. The city outside moved on as if truth had not just been put on trial. Again. He folded the paper and slid it into his jacket pocket. This time, the attack was subtle, not a threat in the night, not a broken lock, not a missing journal page. This was worse. This was the system. Turning inward, folding itself like origami until right and wrong were no longer edges but illusions. When he returned to his room, the walls seemed to lean closer. Every corner felt sharper. But Sundar didn't pace. He didn't curse. He didn't call anyone. Instead, he sat on the floor. Cross-leg. Like he used to as a child in Chennai, listening to his father explain circuit boards on the concrete veranda. Back then, they didn't have sofas. They had the earth beneath them and dreams that rose above them. He closed his eyes, inhaled slowly, and remembered who he was. The next day, Sundar arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. The security guard nodded at him, not as a stranger anymore, but as someone who had become familiar, the man in the simple clothes. The man with the quiet eyes. As Sundar passed through the metal detector, he noticed two men standing near the clerk's desk. Suits too crisp. Eyes too still. Federal. They were here for him. He didn't speak. Didn't even blink. He just walked into the courtroom and waited. The judge entered 10 minutes later, flanked by additional staff. It wasn't a normal session anymore. The air had shifted. The audience filled with reporters now. Cameras not allowed inside still found ways to echo their presence through whispered clicks and the weight of attention. The judge cleared his throat. Mr. Pichai, it has come to the court's attention that the evidence you submitted yesterday, specifically a video file implicating the prosecution's legal team, may have been acquired through unlawful means. Until the matter is resolved, your role as your own legal representative suspended. The words hit like ice. Asterisk, not sharp. Not loud, but absolute. Sundar stood. His voice. Your Honor, the evidence was not obtained by me. It was delivered anonymously. I viewed it only once and then submitted it in good faith. Do you have the original source? No. Then we cannot verify its chain of... But you saw what was on it? Sundar said, his voice never rising. You saw the truth. Truth, the judge said slowly, must still follow the rules. A wave of silence followed, and then the judge made it official. Effective immediately. A court-appointed attorney will take over your defense. This court cannot afford the appearance of misconduct. We are here for justice, not spectacle. And just like that, Sundar was ordered to step down. He returned to his seat. Now sitting behind someone else, a stranger in a suit handed a file to the bailiff. Barely looking at him, the crowd murmured, and Sundar sat very still. But inside, the fire was returning. Not rage, not pride. Asterisk, something older. The memory of sitting under a broken streetlight, trying to read when the power went out. The smell of sweat and diesel in the summer air. The feeling of holding a textbook like it was a lifeline. You don't survive all that just to give up now. That evening, Sundar walked alone, not to his hotel, not to a restaurant. He walked to a park, a small one, quiet, with benches rusting at the edges. He sat there and watched a group of children kick a deflated ball. Their shoes didn't match. One of them didn't have shoes at all. He smiled quietly. Then a familiar voice broke the air. They don't know who you are. He turned. Asterisk. Myra stood there, her scarf wrapped tightly. Her arms crossed not against him, but against the cold truth settling over them both. No, he said, and maybe that's for the best. They took you off the case. I know. What are you going to do? He looked up at her. Find another way. She sat beside him. For the first time in years. No tension. No war. Just quiet. You could walk away, she said. No one would blame you. Maybe not, he said, but I would blame myself. She looked at him for a long time, then handed him a folded paper. This was emailed to me this morning. From a private source. I think someone's trying to fix what they broke. He unfolded it. A scan memo. A confidential communication between the lead attorney and Dr. Lathrop, dated 2 weeks before the trial began. Ensure testimony aligns with narrative. Coordinate language. No deviation. Signed. Initialed. Time dash stamp. Evidence. Real. Evidence. Not a video without a source. This was legal. This was traceable. This could change everything. But it came with risk. Whoever sent it had access to the system. And they were now moving in the shadows. Mira stood. Use it, she said. Or don't. But either way, they're afraid of what you represent. And what's that? Sundar asked. A man who doesn't need a title to be powerful. She walked away. Again. But this time, he didn't feel alone. He folded the memo carefully. The night was colder now. But he no longer felt the chill. Asterisk the barefoot. Truth's courtroom was quieter than usual. No rustling papers. No side conversations. No footsteps echoing down the marble floor. It felt like the moment just before a storm. The judge adjusted his glasses, studied the handwritten motion in front of again, then glanced down at the man who had handed it. To him, Sundar Pichai, no longer seated behind the defense table, but standing at the edge of it, unshaken, with a fire in his eyes that hadn't dimmed since the day he chose to represent himself. This is unorthodox. The judge finally sighed. You've been removed as your own attorney. And yet, you're asking to return not as legal counsel, but as a consultant to your own defense. Sundar nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. On what grounds? On the grounds that the defense attorney is new to this case, and I am the only one who has lived this story from the beginning. I will not speak out of turn. I will not violate procedure. But I will guide my counsel, and I will offer clarity. Not to defend myself, but to defend the truth. The judge stared at him, motion in hand. The courtroom held its breath. Then, with a quiet sigh, he placed the motion aside. Granted, he said. But the moment you cross the line, I will revoke this privilege. Sundar gave a small, respectful bow of his head. He didn't need more than that. He never had. The trial resumed. This time. The defense attorney was prepared not just with the scanned memo Mira had delivered, but with Sundar's quiet instruction. Behind every word, every objection, every question. As the judge called for final arguments, Sundar leaned over and whispered something to the defense lawyer, who nodded, stood, and walked calmly to the center of the courtroom. Your Honor, he began, we request permission to recall a witness. The judge blinked. Who? Dr. Lathrop? A murmur rose among the audience. The same expert who had delivered the damning testimony. The same man caught in a silent exchange of envelopes and glances. A moment later, Lathrop was brought in. Tired, nervous, his once confident posture now twisted by something heavier than guilt shame. The defense attorney asked only one question. Dr. Lathrop, did you alter your testimony after being given specific language by the prosecution? There was a pause. The silence pulled tighter with every second. Sundar didn't look at the man with anger. He looked at him with forgiveness. And somehow, that made the truth even harder to avoid. Yes, Lathrop said, finally. I did. Gasps. Shouts. Reporters. Scribbling. The prosecution stood in protest, yelling about inadmissibility procedure, bias. But the judge raised his hand. Enough, he said. He turned to Sundar. Double quotes, Mr. Pichai. I said you'd better be ready. Sundar stepped forward, calm as ever. I was ready the moment I realized silence protects nothing. The judge ordered a full inquiry into the prosecution. Charges were dropped. The trial dismissed. And the courtroom erupted not in celebration, but in stunned disbelief. Sundar didn't smile. He didn't raise his fist. He walked out the courthouse, the same way he had walked in on the very first day, quiet, steady, with nothing but his bag over one shoulder and the soft thud of his footsteps. Behind him. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Not just press. People. Students. Workers. Immigrants. Those who had followed his story because they saw themselves in him, not in the courtroom battles, but in the journey of someone who chose to speak not louder, but clearer. A reporter shouted, "What do you want to say to the people watching?" Sundar paused. Then turned around. I don't have anything to say, he said gently, but I do have something to show. He bent down and quietly removed his shoes. He stepped barefoot onto the courthouse steps. And walked down. Slowly. One step at a time, like he had done all those years ago in Chennai. Barefoot. Not as a symbol, but as a reminder. You can walk anywhere in this world with nothing on your feet and still carry everything that matters. In the weeks that followed, the case made headlines. The corrupt attorneys were removed from office. The company that had tried to silence Sundar was forced to issue a public apology. And Sundar, he returned to work, not to the boardroom, not to a CEO's office, but to classrooms. He started visiting schools across the country, small ones in forgotten neighborhoods, where dreams still needed permission to be spoken aloud. He didn't teach code. He didn't teach law. He taught something else. He stood barefoot in front of them and said, "You don't need to be loud to be heard. You don't need to be powerful to matter. But you do need to be honest, especially when it costs you everything." Years later, someone asked him why he never wrote a book about the trial. He smiled and said, "Because the real story isn't about what happened in that courtroom. The real story is about what didn't." What do you mean? I didn't lie. I didn't run. I didn't fight dirty. And I didn't forget where I came from. He looked out the window watching a boy outside kick a ball barefoot across the sidewalk. Then he added, "That's all the story anyone needs."